The Pioneer drifted silently through the depths of space, its sleek hull a reflection of humanity's greatest achievements. Captain Talia Ardent stared out the viewport at the endless expanse of stars. It was peaceful here, a serenity that contrasted sharply with the tension in her chest. The Pioneer had been on this mission for months, surveying new star systems for resources, but that peaceful silence was shattered the moment they detected the signal. At first, it was nothing more than a whisper, so faint that it could have been a glitch in the ship's systems. But as the crew analyzed the data, it became clear this was no anomaly. The signal repeated in a complex rhythmic pattern, almost like a heartbeat, pulsing every few minutes. It didn't match any known communication frequency, nor did it resemble any natural phenomenon they'd encountered before. The rhythmic nature of the signal was deliberate, intentional. It was a message. But from whom? "We need to investigate this," Captain Ardent said, turning from the viewport to face her crew. The decision was immediate. She trusted their instincts, but her own curiosity gnawed at her. This was the kind of discovery that could redefine everything humanity knew about the universe. The first officer, Lieutenant Rios, exchanged a glance with the chief engineer, Dr. Naomi Brooks. They had been on edge ever since the signal was first detected, and the tension was palpable. "Captain, there's something else," Rios began, his voice low. "The signal it's getting stronger. It's not just a pulse anymore. It's like it's calling us." "I thought we were calling it," Arden replied, her voice tinged with a mix of amusement and caution. But even as she spoke, a strange feeling washed over her. It was as though the stars themselves were watching them, as if the vast universe beyond had stirred, responding to their presence. The Pioneer altered course toward the signal source, a distant star system on the fringe of known space, its coordinates marking a point that had been unexplored by humanity. There was nothing on the maps. No planets, no moons, no signs of life, just emptiness. But the signal emanated from there, and it was impossible to ignore. As they neared the system, strange things began to happen. The ship's instruments malfunctioned intermittently. The navigation system flickered, losing calibration. Gravity on board fluctuated for brief moments, causing the crew to lose their footing. Arden felt her pulse quicken. Something was wrong, and the closer they got to the source of the signal, the stronger the disturbances became. "Captain, I don't like this," Dr. Brooks said from her station, her fingers dancing across the holographic interface. "The gravitational anomalies are becoming more frequent. We're approaching a region of space that, well, doesn't behave according to known physics. This could be dangerous." The signal, once a soft whisper, was now a loud, insistent hum, almost like it was alive, resonating with a presence beyond their comprehension. "All hands, prepare for full deactivation of external systems," Captain Ardent ordered, her voice calm despite the mounting pressure. "Rios, keep an eye on those fluctuations. We don't know what we're walking into." "Understood," Rios replied, his hand hovering over the emergency shutdown panel. As the Pioneer entered the outer reaches of the system, the signal suddenly stopped. Silence fell over the ship, thick and unnerving. Arden's heart pounded. Had they missed something? Was it a trap? Before she could voice her concerns, the sensors went haywire. A massive gravitational force pulsed from the center of the system, pulling the ship off course. The lights flickered. "Brace for impact," Arden shouted. Everything shook as the ship veered toward an unseen force, and then nothing. The sudden pull released, and the Pioneer stopped dead in space. Ahead of them lay a planet, dark and silent, its surface barely visible, swallowed by shadows. The signal was back, louder now, echoing across the vast emptiness. The planet was waiting, and so was whatever had sent the message. The Pioneer hung motionless in space, its hull vibrating gently from the aftermath of the strange gravitational disturbance. Outside, the dark planet loomed like a silent sentinel, its surface a patchwork of shadow and dim light. No life signs, no heat signatures, not even a trace of atmosphere. The planet was lifeless, or so it seemed. But the signal pulsed, steady and unrelenting, like a heartbeat that refused to be ignored. "Captain, I think we should proceed with caution," Lieutenant Rios said, his voice tight with concern. "We don't know what's out there, and the gravity spike was unlike anything we've encountered before." Arden stared at the planet through the viewport, her mind racing. The signal had led them here for a reason. The possibilities were endless, but the risks were just as great. They were entering uncharted territory, both in space and in their understanding of the universe. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the answers they were looking for were buried deep beneath the planet's surface. "Agreed, Rios, but we're here and we're going in," Arden replied, her voice steady. "Dr. Brooks, any readings from the surface?" Dr. Naomi Brooks, the chief engineer and expert on planetary systems, ran her fingers over the holographic controls, scanning for any sign of activity. "Nothing out of the ordinary, Captain. No signs of life or energy sources, just a dead world. But the signal is still coming from there, strong and clear. If we don't investigate now, we risk losing it." Arden nodded. "Prepare the landing party. We're going down." Within an hour, the Pioneer's shuttle descended through the thin atmosphere of the planet, cutting through a haze of dark clouds that seemed to cling to the surface like a shroud. The landing zone was a vast, desolate plain, marked only by strange stone formations and the occasional jagged mountain peak rising from the ground. The shuttle's landing thrusters kicked up clouds of dust as it touched down, and for a moment, everything was silent. The crew disembarked cautiously, their boots crunching on the barren soil. The air, though thin and lacking oxygen, felt heavy, as though it carried an invisible weight. The ground beneath them seemed solid, but there was an unsettling emptiness that pressed in from all sides. The only sound was the faint hum of the signal, still echoing in their earpieces, a constant reminder that something beyond their understanding was here. Captain Ardent led the team toward the ruins in the distance. The architecture was unlike anything they had seen before, alien in form, yet strangely familiar. Massive stone pillars stretched upward, their surfaces etched with intricate symbols that seemed to shift as they moved, almost as if alive. The buildings were crumbled, worn by time, but the structure of the city suggested a once great civilization had called this place home. "This is unlike anything we've encountered," Dr. Brooks whispered, her voice barely audible as she ran her gloved fingers over the cold stone. "These markings, they don't match any known language or script. It's almost like they were trying to hide something." "Or warn us," Rios added, his eyes scanning the horizon warily. "This place feels wrong. I don't know how, but it does." The signal intensified as they approached the heart of the ruins. There, hidden beneath layers of debris, they uncovered a massive door, an ancient gateway, sealed shut by centuries of dust and age. But as Ardent reached out to touch it, a strange energy field flickered to life around the door, sparking to life as though the building itself recognized their presence. This wasn't just a city. It was a vault, Ardent muttered under her breath. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Whatever had been hidden here, it wasn't meant to be found. The air grew colder, and the hum of the signal became louder, almost deafening. The whispers, faint at first, were now audible to all. They spoke not in words, but in a deep, resonating tone that seemed to burrow into their minds. Turn back now." The crew froze, each of them hearing the voice in their heads, the warning clear. But the curiosity, the drive to uncover the truth, pushed them forward. Captain Arden's voice cut through the eerie silence. "We're not turning back, not yet." As the crew worked to unlock the door, the planet's surface seemed to pulse, as if the very ground beneath them was alive. They had uncovered something ancient and powerful. But the question remained, was it a treasure waiting to be claimed, or a deadly trap designed to destroy anyone foolish enough to seek it? The door groaned as it slowly began to open, its ancient metal screeching in protest, as if unwilling to yield to the intruders. Dust and debris fell away in clouds, the air around the crew growing heavier with each passing second. Ardent, Rios, Dr. Brooks, and the others moved cautiously, their weapons at the ready, scanning every shadow for signs of movement. The ground beneath them seemed to vibrate faintly, as though the planet itself were reacting to their presence. "Something's wrong," Lieutenant Rios muttered, his eyes darting nervously around the darkened hallway revealed by the door. "This place, it's not just dead, it's waiting." The signal's hum had intensified since they entered the ruins, a rhythmic pulse that reverberated through the very walls. Each pulse seemed to align with their footsteps, as if it was responding to their movement, drawing them deeper into the heart of the planet. The air grew colder, and an unsettling feeling of being watched crept over the team. "Stay sharp," Ardent ordered, her voice steady but carrying an edge of urgency. "Whatever this is, we don't know what we're dealing with. Let's stick to the plan." They ventured deeper into the ancient complex, the hallway stretching endlessly in front of them. Strange markings covered the walls, etched with patterns that seemed to shift, as if reacting to their presence. The designs twisted and morphed in ways that defied logic, creating a sense of disorientation in the crew. It was as though the very fabric of the space around them was unstable, like reality itself was fraying at the edges. "This architecture," Dr. Brooks whispered, examining the walls closely, "it's not of this galaxy. These patterns, they're too advanced, even for what we know of pre-spacefaring civilizations. Whoever built this, they were far beyond us." As they pressed forward, a low rumble reverberated through the floor, causing the ground to tremble beneath their boots. The crew paused, exchanging wary glances. The humming of the signal became more intense, louder, until it was almost deafening. It was as though the entire planet was resonating with the frequency. Then, without warning, the floor beneath them gave way. The ground cracked open with a deafening roar, and the crew staggered, barely managing to keep their footing. Ardent reached out, grabbing Rios by the arm, pulling him back from the precipice that had opened before them. "Everyone, hold on," Ardent shouted, her heart racing. "This is no accident." The rumble continued, growing in intensity, and then the ground itself shifted, revealing an enormous chamber beneath them. The walls of the cavern were lined with colossal ancient stone columns, each one adorned with the same shifting symbols. In the center of the cavern lay a massive, crystalline structure, pulsating with an eerie light. The team stood at the edge of the chasm, gazing down into the cavern below. At first glance, it appeared empty, but the closer they looked, the more they could see. The air was thick with an invisible energy, dark, foreboding, and ancient. It felt like the presence of something alive. "Captain," Rios said quietly, his voice trembling with a mix of awe and fear, "I think we found what we were looking for. But I don't think it's meant for us." The signal, once a mere whisper, now roared in their ears. It was coming from the crystalline structure, its pulse matching the rhythm of the planet's heartbeat. The ground continued to tremble, but the crew was mesmerized, unable to tear their eyes away from the glowing crystal. Without warning, the air in the chamber seemed to ripple, like a distortion in the fabric of reality itself. The light from the crystal flickered, and the temperature dropped sharply. A shadow began to take shape in the center of the room, a massive ethereal figure, its form shifting in and out of existence like a ghost. "Do not interfere," a voice echoed in their minds, not spoken but felt. It was a deep, resonant tone, one that seemed to vibrate within their very bones. "You do not understand the power you have awakened." The crew froze, hearts pounding. The voice, no, the presence, was ancient, impossibly old, and it radiated an authority that none of them had ever encountered before. The planet was no longer a lifeless rock. It was alive with the echoes of something far beyond their comprehension. "Turn back," the voice urged, its tone colder now. "Leave before it is too late." But it was already too late. The awakening had begun. The figure in the center of the cavern shimmered, its outline flickering in and out of focus like a mirage. The crew stood frozen in place, their bodies tense, their minds struggling to process the enormity of what was unfolding before them. The voice, which seemed to echo through their very souls, reverberated once again, its tone heavy with both warning and sorrow. "You have crossed the threshold," it intoned. "The time has come to face the consequences of your actions." Arden's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of the presence pressing in on her, its power almost suffocating. Her mind raced, searching for an explanation, a reason for the figure's existence. The symbols they had seen etched into the ruins, the strange energy pulsing from the crystal, everything was connected, and yet nothing made sense. "What are you?" Dr. Brooks whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this place?" The figure's form wavered, a ripple passing through it like a distortion in the air. It looked down at them, or perhaps through them, its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, glowing with an ancient light that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. "I am but a fragment," the voice replied, "a remnant of a civilization that once spanned the cosmos. We were the keepers of time, the custodians of existence itself. We safeguarded the flow of reality, ensuring that the universe remained in balance. But you have disturbed the delicate weave of time." A shiver ran down Arden's spine. She had suspected that they were dealing with something far more advanced than anything humanity had encountered before, but this was beyond comprehension. The idea that the fabric of time itself could be manipulated by others, that their actions had caused some imbalance, was almost too much to bear. "How?" Rios asked, his voice sharp. "How did we disturb time? We just came to investigate a signal." The figure seemed to sigh, its form flickering with what almost appeared to be sadness. "The signal you followed, it was not meant for you. It was a beacon, yes, but not one meant for mortal beings. It was a warning, a last effort to protect the balance. You have unknowingly triggered an awakening, and now the consequences of your interference are irreversible." As the figure spoke, the cavern around them seemed to warp, the walls bending and twisting in impossible ways. The ground trembled again, and for a brief moment, time itself appeared to stutter, like a video reel skipping frames. The pulse of the crystal intensified, its light flickering erratically, casting strange, elongated shadows across the cavern. Dr. Brooks staggered back, her face pale. "No, this isn't possible. We're not just in a place of power. We've entered a rift, a fracture in the timeline." The realization hit Arden like a bolt of lightning. The crystal, the strange energy, the shifting symbols, it wasn't just an artifact. It was a catalyst, a conduit to an alternate reality, a breaking point in the flow of time itself. This planet, this ruin, had been designed to anchor the universe's timeline. And now it was unraveling. "How do we fix this?" Arden demanded, her voice rising with urgency. "We can't let this destroy everything we fought for." The figure's form solidified once more, its presence looming like an impenetrable wall. "You cannot fix what has already been broken," it replied. "But there is still a way to contain the damage. You must return to where it all began, the place where the first fracture occurred. Only then can you hope to restore balance." A pulse of energy shot from the crystal, a wave of raw power that washed over the crew. Arden's mind exploded with visions, fragments of the past and future, glimpses of worlds that never were, timelines collapsing and reforming in chaotic waves. The universe was splintering, and she could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. "The path is open," the figure said, its voice fading, becoming more distant. "But beware, the consequences of your choices will shape the very future of existence." Before Arden could respond, the figure's form dissipated, leaving only the hum of the crystal and the faint echoes of its warning behind. The crew stood at the precipice, staring at the shifting, unstable world before them. The rift had opened, and now they had no choice but to step through. The cavern grew still after the figure faded, leaving behind only the resonating hum of the crystal. The light that pulsed from it seemed to grow dimmer now, as if the force that had animated it had been drained. Arden's heart raced, and her breath was shallow, still struggling to grasp the full scope of what had just happened. The universe itself was in danger, and they were at the epicenter. What do we do now? Rios' voice cracked, his words filled with uncertainty. He stared at the swirling energy emanating from the crystal, his eyes wide, hands shaking slightly as he clutched his rifle. Arden took a steadying breath, forcing herself to focus. We follow the figure's instructions. We go back to the origin point, the source of the fracture. It's the only way to fix this, to put time back in order. Dr. Brooks stepped forward, her face pale, a mix of awe and horror etched in every line. But how do we even know where to start? We don't even understand how we triggered this rupture, let alone where the fracture began. I know, Arden said, her voice hardening with resolve. But we have no choice. If we fail here, it's not just our world we're saving, it's the entire galaxy, the very fabric of reality. If this timeline unravels completely, she let the words hang in the air, the implications clear and terrifying. The ground rumbled again, this time with a deeper, more insistent force. The walls of the cavern seemed to shift, the shifting symbols beginning to pulse like a heartbeat. The crystal at the center of the room flickered, casting shadows that danced and stretched unnaturally across the jagged floor. Arden glanced at Dr. Brooks. What's happening? Dr. Brooks adjusted her glasses, eyes scanning the chamber. The fracturing of time is accelerating. The rift is expanding. We need to move now. They turned quickly, heading toward the narrow passage that led further into the ruins, hoping it would lead them to the source of the disturbance. The pulse of the crystal seemed to be guiding them, each thrum drawing them closer, louder, until it became a cacophony reverberating in their chests. As they made their way down the dark corridor, Arden could feel the very air around them vibrating, a subtle dissonance in the natural flow of time. Time itself seemed to buckle and warp with each step they took. The walls shimmered, shifting like reflections on water, distorting in and out of focus. I don't think this place was meant to be entered, Rios muttered, his voice laced with dread. Everything feels wrong, like it's watching us. It's not just the ruins, Dr. Brooks added, her voice distant. Time itself is becoming unstable. These walls are shifting not just in space, but in time. The boundaries are fracturing here. This entire place is a paradox. Suddenly, the ground jolted beneath their feet. The passage ahead twisted violently, the walls narrowing and expanding as though they were alive. The air thickened, and the hum from the crystal was now a roaring, thunderous sound. It felt like the entire planet was being torn apart at the seams. "Get down," Arden shouted, pulling Dr. Brooks to the ground, just as the walls began to crack open, releasing bursts of blinding light. A figure materialized before them, its form solidifying from the chaotic energy swirling in the air. It was the same entity they had encountered in the cavern earlier, but this time it was different. Its form was more distinct, more solid, though still translucent, as though it were both there and not there at the same time. "You have ventured too far," the voice boomed, reverberating with authority and finality. "The fabric of time has been altered irreparably. There is no returning to what was." Ardent scrambled to her feet, her pulse pounding in her temples. "We were told we could fix it, restore balance. Please, you have to help us." The figure's form flickered again, its gaze intense and unreadable. "Help? You seek to repair a wound that is beyond healing. The fracture has already been embedded within the heart of the universe. What you have done cannot be undone." Rios gripped his rifle tighter, the weight of their situation sinking in. "Then what? What are we supposed to do?" The figure paused, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. "There is one way," it finally said, its voice like the distant rumble of thunder. "But the cost will be great. You must journey into the heart of the fracture itself, to the point where time began to split. It is there that you will find the key to mending what is broken. But beware, time will not be kind to those who seek to undo its work." Without waiting for a response, the figure began to fade, its presence dissolving into the shifting chaos of the corridor. The hum of the crystal grew deafening, urging them forward into the abyss. With no other choice, Arden turned to her crew. "We go forward. We don't stop." And so they moved on, deeper into the unknown, where the very essence of time awaited them, and with it, the decision that would either save or doom the universe. The passage ahead twisted like a serpent, its path narrowing, darkening with each step. The air around them seemed to pulse, thick with a sense of dread, as if the very fabric of reality were holding its breath. Arden's heart thudded in her chest, every instinct screaming that they were on the verge of something monumental, something beyond their control. "Stay sharp," Arden ordered, her voice steady despite the growing tension. "We don't know what we're walking into." Rios's grip on his rifle tightened, his eyes scanning the walls. "This place is a nightmare. Time is moving differently here. I can't even trust my watch. It's like we're slipping between moments." Dr. Brooks nodded in agreement, her face etched with worry. "This place isn't just some ancient ruin. It's a time anomaly. The closer we get to the fracture, the more unstable everything becomes. I don't know how much longer we can keep going." Arden swallowed the growing fear that bubbled in her throat. If the fracture was as deep as they were led to believe, then there was no way to predict what awaited them at its heart. But they had no choice. The universe, as they knew it, hung in the balance. They had to continue. The passage eventually opened into a vast chamber, larger than any they had encountered before. The walls shimmered with an eerie, unnatural glow, and at the center of the room lay a massive, swirling vortex, a rift in the very fabric of reality. It twisted and churned like a living thing, the edges sparking with raw, violent energy. Arden felt her stomach lurch at the sight of it. This was it. This was the fracture, the wound in time that had to be healed. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. "This is where it all started," Dr. Brooks said quietly, her voice filled with awe and fear. "The rupture, it's not just in space. It's a tear in the timeline itself." Rios scanned the vortex with a mix of disbelief and terror. "How do we even begin to fix this? We're not exactly equipped for this kind of thing." "We follow the figure's instructions," Arden replied, her voice firm. "We find the key to mending this rift, no matter the cost." They approached the vortex cautiously, the air growing colder, the hum of the crystal now a constant, maddening buzz in their ears. As they neared the swirling rift, the ground beneath their feet trembled, and the vortex seemed to react to their presence, expanding and contracting in time with their heartbeats. A faint, familiar voice echoed through the chamber, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. "You are too late." The words came from nowhere and everywhere at once, vibrating through their bones. Arden froze, her eyes scanning the room for the source. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine, the voice both a warning and a challenge. "Who's there?" she demanded. The rift seemed to pulse in response, and then a figure emerged from within its depths. It was not the same being they had encountered before. This one was darker, its form more solid, more menacing. It wore the shape of a human, but the eyes that stared back at them were empty, black voids. "I am the keeper of time's wound," the figure said, its voice low and filled with ancient power. "You should not have come here. The rift was never meant to be healed. Time has its course. The fracture was meant to be." Dr. Brooks took a step forward, her eyes narrowed with determination. "We can't let this happen. We can't let everything fall apart because of some cosmic accident. There's always a way." The figure's laugh was cold, hollow. "You speak of choices, but the truth is far darker than you can imagine. The fracture you seek to heal is no accident. It is the will of time itself, a necessary force to balance the universe. Ardent clenched her fists, her mind racing. The figure before them wasn't just a guardian of time, it was something older, something that understood the true nature of existence. This wasn't merely about saving their world or even their galaxy. It was about the very foundation of reality itself. "You're saying the destruction of time is necessary?" Arden asked, struggling to understand. "That everything we're trying to do is wrong." The figure's expression twisted into something that could almost be considered a smile. "I do not say it is wrong. I say it is inevitable. Time does not obey the will of mortals. You cannot fix what was never meant to be fixed." The vortex roared louder now, as if it were alive, consuming the room. The ground began to shake, cracks forming in the walls. The very air shimmered and warped. The figure raised its hand, and the rift expanded further, pushing the crew back. "This is the end," it declared, "and there is no salvation. You will watch as time unravels." Arden gritted her teeth, refusing to let the weight of its words crush her resolve. "We'll see about that." With one final, determined look at her crew, she stepped forward into the heart of the rift, prepared to face whatever came next. This was their last chance. Arden's heart raced as she stepped into the heart of the rift. The moment her foot crossed the threshold, the world seemed to explode into a cacophony of light and sound. The very fabric of reality seemed to unravel around her, colors and shapes bending in impossible directions. The ground beneath her feet ceased to exist, replaced by an endless expanse of swirling patterns that had no origin, no end. It was as though she were floating in the void between moments, caught between past and future. "Ardent!" Rios shouted, his voice distant, but somehow reaching her. She turned her head, seeing him and Dr. Brooks struggling to maintain their footing at the rift's edge, their figures distorted by the chaotic energy swirling around them. But no one could cross the boundary. The rift's energy kept them locked out, powerless to act. Arden took a deep breath, trying to steady her mind amidst the overwhelming chaos. This was it, the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything humanity had fought for. But now, standing at the center of time's wound, the weight of it all pressed down on her, threatening to consume her. "Time is a circle," the dark figure's voice echoed, reverberating through her mind. "A loop that never ends, never begins. What you seek to undo cannot be undone." The words were like daggers, each one twisting in her heart. Arden's grip tightened on the pulse blade at her side, the weapon now faintly humming in tune with the rift's chaotic energy. She refused to listen to the figure's words. This was not the end, not yet. The rift trembled, and before her, a series of images began to materialize. They were fleeting flashes, memories of moments long past, moments that never should have been. The first image was her mother, younger, smiling at her from a time she had forgotten. The second was a younger Ardent, running through the fields on her homeworld, full of hope and innocence. But then the images darkened. A battle, a war, the devastation that followed. Death, destruction, a civilization reduced to ashes. The images came faster now, an endless cascade of fragmented memories. People she had loved, places she had been, all slipping through her fingers, leaving her with nothing but the unbearable weight of loss. Each image carried the unmistakable taste of inevitability, as though time itself was trying to prove its point. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "This isn't how it ends. Not like this." Her pulse blade hummed louder, its light intensifying. Arden could feel the pull of the rift, the way it tried to drag her into its depths, to consume her and erase everything she knew. But she resisted. With every ounce of strength, she fought against it, her will a beacon of defiance in the face of oblivion. And then, as if responding to her determination, the rift began to slow. The swirling chaos around her started to settle, the images fading. For a brief moment, everything became still. Time itself seemed to pause, caught in an eternal moment between destruction and creation. A voice, so familiar, yet so distant, whispered in her ear, "You have come far, Ardent. But what makes you believe you can change time itself? That you have the power to undo what has been set in motion?" The figure stood before her once more, its black eyes like voids, staring into her soul. But this time, there was something different in its presence. It wasn't just a force of destruction. It was something ancient, something that existed beyond even time itself. It was a reflection of the universe's laws, an embodiment of the very principle of inevitability. "I don't have the power to change time," Ardent said, her voice steady, "but humanity does. We're not slaves to fate. We fight, we adapt, we find a way, no matter the odds." The figure's expression shifted, a hint of something like amusement flickering across its face. "You are brave, human, but you are alone in this. You cannot defeat time itself." "No," Arden replied firmly, "I'm not alone." She turned her gaze back to the edge of the rift, where Rios and Dr. Brooks stood, their figures still distorted but unwavering. They were waiting for her, trusting her. They had always trusted her. She raised her blade high, its light now blinding, cutting through the rift's darkness. The pulse of energy that flowed from it was pure and undiluted, filled with the resolve of every soul who had fought to protect their world, their people, their future. The rift howled in response, its edges beginning to crack and splinter. "This isn't just my fight," Arden said, stepping closer to the center. "This is humanity's fight, and we'll win." With one final defiant thrust, she drove the pulse blade into the rift, its light blinding as it collided with the heart of the fracture. The rift screamed in agony, time itself groaning as the blade's energy began to resonate through its core. The universe trembled, reality itself cracked, and then silence. The silence that followed the blade's strike was unlike anything Ardent had ever experienced. The rift, the wound in time, no longer screamed, no longer thrashed or pulsed with chaotic energy. Instead, it was as though the very fabric of existence had held its breath and was now waiting. The light from her pulse blade blazed at the center, a steady, unwavering beacon in the void. For a moment, nothing moved. Arden stood at the heart of the fracture, her body trembling from the strain of her efforts. Her pulse blade was embedded deep into the rift, glowing brighter with every passing second, but even she couldn't tell if it was working. The universe was still, and that stillness threatened to suffocate her, to make her believe that the fight was futile. But she had come this far. She couldn't afford to doubt now. Slowly, the light from the pulse blade began to shift. The swirling colors and distorted patterns of the rift started to realign, as though being pulled back together, piece by piece. Ardent felt the energy within the rift respond to her blade, pushing outward like a force of nature. It was the very essence of time, trying to heal itself, to pull the shattered threads of the universe back into balance. And then, just as quickly as it had fractured, the rift began to mend. The jagged edges smoothed, the violent energy dissipating into the void, leaving behind a peaceful, steady hum that resonated deep within Ardent's chest. Time, once shattered, was now healing. From the edge of the rift, Rios and Dr. Brooks watched in stunned silence as the light from the pulse blade began to expand. The rift, once a vortex of destruction, now looked like a calm, distant star, its energy soft but powerful. It no longer threatened to tear the universe apart. Instead, it pulsed with the rhythm of the cosmos, a heartbeat that matched their own. "We did it," Rios whispered, his voice reverberating through the stillness. "We actually did it." Arden took a deep breath, her body heavy with exhaustion, but her spirit soaring. She had known this was possible. She had known that humanity, in its relentless drive to survive and adapt, had the strength to overcome even the deepest fractures of reality. But knowing it and seeing it were two very different things. "We didn't do it alone," she said, her eyes meeting Dr. Brooks's. "This is all of us. Every step, every sacrifice, led us here." Dr. Brooks nodded, her expression a mixture of awe and relief. "We didn't just fix a rift. We fixed the very concept of time itself. We gave it a new chance." The figure that had once threatened them now stood motionless at the edge of the rift, its dark presence fading. The void in its eyes had softened, almost as if it had come to some sort of realization. It said nothing, its form dissolving into the aether, as though acknowledging its defeat. Arden turned back to the mended rift, the glow now steady and calm. The fracturing of time was over. The universe would not be torn apart. But there was something else, a sense of peace that stretched far beyond the rift. Time would continue to flow, but it was no longer chaotic. There was balance, harmony. But the real test had yet to come. What would the universe do now that it had been saved? What would humanity's place be in the grand scheme of time? "I'm not sure how much time we have left," Rhea said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But it feels like it's time for us to leave." Arden's lips curled into a faint smile. "Yeah, we've done enough." She turned back to face the rift one last time. The world they knew was still out there, waiting. Their fight was not over. There were still battles to be fought, mysteries to be solved, and futures to be shaped. But this time, they wouldn't face it alone. They had changed the course of history, and no matter what came next, humanity had proven that it could shape its own destiny. With one last look at the restored rift, Arden turned and walked toward her crew. Time, they knew, was no longer a prison. It was their ally, their guide, and with it, they would move forward into the unknown stronger than ever. The universe was theirs to explore, and humanity's echo would resound throughout all of it.